What's up, everybody? I wanted to make this video because I've done some thinking about UFC 300 and noticed some very bizarre things going on around the UFC, Dana White, and just the sport of MMA in general that I'm going to highlight in this video and tell you I believe UFC 300 is not only going to be the biggest UFC event of all time, I believe that this is going to come out of nowhere and is going to have the community in shambles. And guys, the reason I mention this is I'm going to start with our first piece of evidence, right? We know that Dana White recently, the other day announced the fights between Max Holloway, Justin Gaethje, and Jim Miller versus Bobby Green. Now, I rewatched that, and you know what's really odd to me? In all of these announcements that we have seen, even going back to Charles Oliveira versus Arman Tsarukyan, Zhang Weili versus Yan Xiaonan, we don't have we haven't heard the words co-main event, opening the main card, main event. We have not heard those specific details come from Dana White. And Dana this entire time has had this very smug and patient approach to UFC 300. And guys, there's another thing to factor in here. The PFL or Bellator, the merger there, just announced a gigantic card February 24th. You think that Dana White's going to let that slide? You think he's going to let that slide? You think that Dana White, after the PFL Bellator, the biggest fight card ever in MMA outside of the UFC was announced the other day, you think Dana just was suppressing that by announcing Max Holloway versus Justin Gaethje? I don't think so. I believe there's a couple things going on here. I believe, number one, I made a video that I'll link down in the description of me discussing the possibility of Jorge Gamebred Masvidal making a return to take on Nathan Diaz. I believe it's very likely that we see that fight on UFC 300, and the reason being, it's kind of unfinished business, right? It's a matchup we saw a long time ago. It's two big names. They're both kind of past their prime. They're both older. So it's a little bit more fair of a matchup because you really can't bring these guys back against some of these young up-and-comers. We want to see a good competitive fight for both of these guys. Why not put them in there against each other, right? So that's the first one. I've already kind of been on the record saying that one. Then is it possible that Michael Chandler and Conor McGregor have been playing a game of misdirection? And I know that that could sound crazy, guys, but we have not heard an announcement from Dana White or the UFC about Conor McGregor. And it's like, why would Conor McGregor come out on New Year's Day being like, this is who I'm fighting and when and where? And then we don't hear anything from the UFC. And everyone's like, well, Conor calls his own shots. And it's like, sort of, right? But when Conor was going to fight on The Ultimate Fighter, we had this big announcement on ESPN. Anytime Conor fights, it's like there's a press conference going on and Dana's always like, we got something to show you. And then boom, on the projector behind them, voila, there's a Conor McGregor fight announcement. Well, we haven't gotten that. And it's like, well, the return of Conor McGregor is always anticipated. So the UFC doesn't have a promotion that drops immediately after they say this fight's happening? Is it possible that everyone was kind of taking this for granted of being UFC 300? Maybe the UFC is trying to figure out a way to really blow UFC 300 out of the water, because let me tell you something. All of you out there complaining about UFC 300, I have said in numerous videos, be patient, stop crying, because this PFL Bellator thing is going to bring out the best in Dana White and the UFC moving forward, especially around March and April. He knows that whole card going on. It's not that that card threatens the UFC per se. It's that's who Dana is. He's a competitor. He wants to bury these other promotions. He gets off on that. He gets off on, Franics Ngannou has a boxing match. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to build the biggest card we can just to screw him over. Like, that's who Dana White is. I believe, and that's what makes Dana White so unique, and that's what has made him great at what he does. I believe Dana White and the UFC have something gigantic up their sleeve for UFC 300. I think this card is going to end up being bigger than what we anticipated, than what anyone has anticipated. I'm actually getting to the point where I'm slightly worried at what the next couple months following UFC 300 are going to look like, because I do believe that there's a reason Justin Gaethje and Max Holloway are fighting each other, right? I know I've made videos breaking this fight down, talking about, well, I believe, Gaethje wants an exciting fight. He didn't really want to fight Max Holloway. He's been on the record saying that. So why does he want to fight Max all of a sudden? Well, you could say money. You could say, and everyone's like, well, he's got a title shot potentially on the table against Islam Makhachev. But is it possible that there's something bigger to this, right, guys? I made a video that I'll also link down in the description months ago, a long time ago, before my channel had almost no subscribers. And that was the fact that the UFC bringing the BMF belt back into contention or back on the table would have something to do with Conor McGregor and future possible plans. Now, that could be wrong, that could be whatever, but I do believe that there is the possibility that the UFC is trying to play multiple angles with this belt, because everyone keeps calling it a gimmick, and I don't think it's a gimmick. I think it's entertaining. It's the BMF belt is, listen, these guys either have won the belt, they don't have it anymore, or they're an exciting fighter that just isn't able to get their hands on the belt, but we can kind of treat like a champion and put them in exciting matchups where the fans get to see them perform at what they do best. Hence, strikers versus strikers, things like that. So I believe that the UFC is pulling multiple angles when it comes to UFC 300. And I bring it back up to that point. Max Holloway and Justin Gaethje, that fight announcement, Dana didn't say the co-main event, the main event. He didn't even say that was the main card. Now, I'm not saying that. I would find it hard to believe that Gaethje, those two title fights are probably going to be on the main card. And I'm not saying that we're going to get a decked out card with, 5 title fights or something. But I do believe that we are going to see Poatan on this card. And it more than likely will probably be Jamal Hill, because I'm not sure that Magomed Ankalaev's they're going to turn him around, considering Jamal Hill vacated the belt. We saw Yuri vacated the belt, and you were like, you're next when you come back. So I feel like that's how the UFC operates. I feel like they'll honor that, because Jamal Hill and Pineda have a little bit of beef, right? It's really the only beef at 205. I know Ankalaev was trying to kind of get in there by talking crazy and things like that, but I do believe the more exciting matchup is going to be Hill versus Pineda, because he's a striker, and there's a potential for a knockout on either side. So I believe that there's a legit shot that we could see that at UFC 300. There's also Leon Edwards, right? We know that we've heard multiple times from multiple different, people out there talking about the possibility of Leon Edwards, Belal Muhammad on UFC 300. Does Leon actually fight Belal? I don't know. Does that fight actually take place on UFC 300? I think we see Leon Edwards on UFC 300. The question is, who's it going to be against, right? I know that it could be Belal or it could be someone else. I don't know. There's been rumors about Khabib coming back. Is that just talk? I find it weird how DC on his channel the other day is talking with Ben Askren, and DC didn't put the nail in the coffin on this talk. So it's like he said, well, Khabib turned down a bunch of money, but he didn't go, Khabib said no way, and DC didn't say any of that, and he's close to Khabib. I'm not saying Khabib's coming back, just some interesting things to think about. So I believe the UFC is letting multiple things play out. I believe that the winner of UFC 297's main event between Strickland and Duplessis could very well be on UFC 300 taking on Israel Adesanya. So I think, guys, at the end of the day, I've been on my channel very advocate at defending UFC 300, because you guys, man, everyone's so quick to crap on the UFC and Dana. Listen, when they face some competition, I'm not saying that the PFL and Franics Ngannou and these guys are rivaling the UFC per se, because the UFC is the UFC. Dana loves a reason to shut people up, to overshadow, to dominate the market. You don't think that he's going to deck out UFC 300? We don't know where any of these fights are taking place. We don't even know if Yuri versus Rakic is going to be on the main card. That's to me, on any other pay-per-view, that's a pay-per-view fight. I'm not saying it's the most exciting fight, but the two big names in the light heavyweight division, we haven't heard any places of what is taking place on the card of UFC 300. So like I said before, stay patient. Like this video, comment your opinion below. Do you guys think I'm on to something? Do you agree? Subscribe to the channel, help your boy out. Appreciate you all. See you next time.